We're going to stay in Nairobi and speak to Mathilde Vu, who is the advocacy manager for the Norwegian Refugee Council in Sudan. But we speak to you in Nairobi. Mathilde, thank you so much for your time. What are the main obstacles that stop refugees finding safety abroad, outside their home nation?
Thank you for having me. That's a very good question. That's a very heartbreaking question, actually, when you look at the context of Sudan, for example. Nobody know actually that, but Sudan is the country in Africa that has the second largest number of refugees. It was close to 1 million people. 1 million people, South Sudanese, mostly Ethiopian, Eritrean, but also Syrian, Yemeni, Central African, who were forced to choose, for example, Sudan as the place of asylum because they were fleeing conflict, most of the time, really, really difficult violence in their home country. Now, turns April 15, and we have a major war in the middle of a capital city where a lot of the refugees are. And so one of the big difficulty for those refugees inside Sudan is once again violence. And I think this is something that the world needs to understand, is that the large numbers of refugees, they don't go to Europe, they go to neighboring countries. And neighboring countries are usually very fragile countries. And this is the case for Sudan, which was extremely fragile, and that now is in a context of war. And so all those refugees who had, who thought they had safety in Sudan are now fleeing, like all the Sudanese across the country and also across borders.
I think that point about refugees staying close to the countries they have left is critical, because it does appear that the global south is bearing the brunt of having to host refugees. And certainly most refugees seem to come from the global south. Does that mean that there's a lack of solidarity from the global north? Any developed country that thinks it has a problem in the number of refugees coming to its shores, it seems to have no idea about how much other countries are doing.
I mean, you're putting it right. It's the global south that is receiving most of the refugees, and this is why when there is major call for solidarity, we call for the richest country to help those neighboring countries, to help those host communities into hosting refugees. Hosting refugees doesn't mean only welcoming them into the borders. It also means providing refugees with certain rights, with dignified living condition, with freedom of movement, with protection. And this is something that the international community, and especially the richer country, have the responsibility to uphold. They have to uphold it at home when they receive small numbers of refugees, but they also have to uphold it whenever they give, for example, funding to hosting countries, to ensure that the funding is used for refugees and host communities, for their rights and for their living conditions.
What's actually more important to the Norwegian Refugee Council, Mathilde? More money, more finance, or rather a change of attitude in countries that have the ability to host more people? They have the money, they have the resources.
That's a very good question. I would say a change of attitude and behavior would actually promote more funding to the receiving countries. Let me give you the example of people who are fleeing Sudan right now. So as I said, there's 1 million refugees in Sudan. They're fleeing right now. Some of them are going to camps. Some of them are crossing back to the country that they once fled. There is also 500,000 people in general, Sudanese and refugees who are fleeing across. Some of them do not want to go too far. A lot of people, for them, it was a heartbreak to have to leave Sudan. It was a heartbreak to leave home. And a lot of people, they're staying, closer to their country of origin because they hope that one day they can return. So thinking that, like the West can, or the larger, richer country can just as they welcome everybody would be perhaps a little bit false. However, it's very important that the neighboring countries are supported. And on the other side, it's very important that the neighboring countries keep their borders open. Because, for example, again, for the case of Sudan kept their borders open for decades.
Mathilde, thank you so much indeed. Really, really appreciate your participation. Mathilde Vu from the Norwegian Refugee Council.